For 4 days, billionaire Harlon Whitmore's newborn twins did not sleep. They screamed until their tiny voices broke. They cried until doctors ran out of answers. Specialists came and went. Machines hummed. Money poured out. Nothing worked. And then, at 6:47 on Thursday morning, the house went silent. Not because of medicine, but because a maid walked through the servant's door. Thursday morning, 6:47 a.m., Naomi Brooks pushes through the servant's entrance of the Whitmore estate, her worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her sensible shoes barely making a sound on the marble floors. The mansion is silent in that terrible, exhausted way that follows endless nights of chaos. But it is not peace. It is surrender. And then she hears it. The sound that has haunted this house for 4 consecutive days and nights. The desperate, soul-deep wailing of 2 infants crying in perfect, heartbreaking harmony. Elio and Marin, the 4-day-old twins of billionaire Harlon Whitmore, have not stopped crying for more than 20 minutes at a time since they came home from the hospital. At 34 years old, Naomi has been working as a housekeeper in the Whitmore mansion for 6 months. Quiet, efficient, practically invisible to most of the family. 6 months of scrubbing floors and changing linens and moving through rooms like a shadow. 6 months, and she has never heard anything like this. "Dear Lord," she whispers, her hand instinctively moving to the small silver cross at her throat. Those precious babies are crying out for something no one can give them. She pauses at the base of the grand staircase, listening. The cries are not just loud. They are primal, ancient, the kind of sound that reaches into your chest and squeezes until you cannot breathe. Naomi has heard crying like this only once before. The night her own son died in her arms 7 years ago, 3 months old, gone before she could understand why. Harlon Whitmore appears at the top of the stairs like a man who has been dragged through hell and left to find his own way back. At 42 years old, the real estate mogul and tech investor is worth $3.7 billion. Forbes called him the king of calculated risk. Wall Street watches his every move, but none of that matters now. His salt and pepper hair stands in wild angles. His eyes are bloodshot, rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that makes a man hallucinate. His tailored shirt hangs half untucked, wrinkled beyond salvation, and he grips the banister like it is the only thing keeping him upright. They say Harlon Whitmore built an empire through sheer force of will, that he never loses, never flinches, never breaks. Yet here he stands, utterly destroyed by 2 7-pound babies he cannot comfort. It has been 4 days since anyone in this house has truly slept. 4 days of specialists cycling through like guests at a hotel. 4 days of machines, monitors, medications, theories. 4 days of hell. Dr. Bernard Chen, the 62-year-old pediatrician who delivered the twins, stands near the doorway to the nursery with a clipboard clutched against his chest and defeat written across his face. "Mr. Whitmore, I have consulted with 6 colleagues. We have run every test imaginable. There is no medical explanation for this. The babies are healthy. Physically, they are perfectly fine." Fine? Harlan's voice cracks like breaking glass. Does this sound fine to you? Does watching my children scream until they vomit sound healthy? Tell me what I'm supposed to do, doctor. Tell me. Naomi stands frozen in the foyer, the raw anguish in his voice cutting straight through her ribs. She knows that pain. She has lived it. 2 years of grief counseling could not erase the memory of holding her son as his tiny body went limp, of begging God to take her instead, of waking up every morning wishing she had not. She understands what it means to watch someone so small suffer and be powerless to stop it. Harlon pulls out his phone with shaking hands, making another call, his voice breaking into fragments as he begs someone on the other end for answers, for options, for a miracle. But the response only deepens the hollow look in his eyes. They do not know. The best neonatologists in Chicago do not know. The specialists at Northwestern Memorial do not know. He has spent $180,000 in 4 days. Money means nothing. He ends the call and hurls the phone across the hallway. It shatters against an oil painting worth more than Naomi's annual salary. Dr. Chen steps back instinctively, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "It is useless," Harlon chokes out, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am useless. I built companies. I closed billion-dollar deals. I can move markets with a single signature. But I cannot make my own children stop crying. I could not save their mother, and now I cannot save them." Naomi's breath catches in her throat. She knows the story everyone whispers. Harlan's wife, Catherine, died in childbirth, complications, hemorrhaging. The twins survived. She did not. 4 days ago, Harlon brought his babies home to a mansion that would never hear their mother's voice. Naomi watches him crumble. This man who has everything and nothing, and something inside her shifts, something dormant, something she thought died alongside her son in that hospital room 7 years ago. The cries of the twins grow louder, more frantic. Elio and Marin, 4 days old, fighting against something the doctors cannot see, cannot measure, cannot fix, crying for a mother who will never answer, crying for comfort that money cannot purchase. Harlon sinks slowly to his knees on the Persian rug, his hands covering his face. "If they do not stop soon," he whispers, voice muffled and broken, "I do not know how much longer I can survive this. I do not know how to be their father if I cannot even give them peace." Dr. Chen places a hand on his shoulder, helpless. The household staff stand scattered. Throughout the hallway, eyes red, hearts heavy, none of them knowing what to do. But Naomi knows. She does not know how she knows. She only knows that something in her spirit recognizes something in theirs. Some invisible thread of suffering and grace, woven by hands that do not belong to this world. She sets down her cleaning supplies. She walks toward the stairs. And as she climbs each step, she begins to pray. Before we go any further, take a second to support this story. Subscribe now to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves emotional stories like this. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to see how far this story has traveled. Naomi Brooks was born in a shotgun house on the south side of Chicago, where the walls were thin, but the faith was thick. Her grandmother, Esther May Brooks, raised her after Naomi's mother disappeared into the streets when Naomi was 4 years old. Esther May was a woman who spoke in scripture and moved in prayer, whose hands smelled perpetually of cocoa butter, and whose voice could shake the rafters of Greater Hope Baptist Church every Sunday morning. She taught Naomi that healing does not always come from medicine, that some battles are fought in the spirit realm where doctors cannot see and science cannot measure. That prayer is not just words thrown at heaven, but a laying down of your own will in exchange for God's. When Esther May laid hands on sick neighbors, they got better. When she prayed over colicky babies in the congregation, they calmed. People called it a gift. She called it obedience. Naomi learned by watching, by listening, by kneeling beside her grandmother's bed at night and whispering the same prayers until they became as natural as breathing. Then came the year Naomi turned 27. She was married to Marcus, a construction worker with kind eyes and rough hands who promised her forever. She was 5 months pregnant with their son. They had already picked the name Joshua Emmanuel, little Joshua, God saves, God with us. But God felt very far away the night Marcus lost control of their car on black ice and wrapped it around a telephone pole on Route 41. Marcus died instantly. Joshua lived for 3 hours in Naomi's arms in the ICU, his tiny, premature body fighting a fight he could not win. The doctors did everything medically possible. It was not enough. Naomi held her son as his heartbeat slowed. She sang to him. She prayed over him. She begged God to take her instead. He died anyway. For 2 years after that, Naomi stopped praying. She went to work. She paid bills. She existed. But something vital inside her had been buried alongside her husband and son in that cemetery plot she could barely afford. Until one night, alone in her apartment, she heard Esther May's voice in her memory. Some pain is meant to break you open, so God can fill the cracks with something stronger. Naomi wept, until there were no tears left. And then, for the first time in 2 years, she prayed. Not for herself, just for the strength to survive one more day. That was 3 years ago. Now, at 34, Naomi works quietly in the homes of people who do not see her. She cleans their floors and washes their dishes and folds their children's clothes while they conduct conference calls and plan vacations she will never take. But she also prays. Over every room she enters, over every person she encounters, silently, persistently, faithfully. Because she learned the hardest way possible that wounds of the Spirit require healing of the Spirit, and the Whitmore twins were wounded in a place no ultrasound could reveal. 4 days, 96 hours of a hell no one could explain. Naomi watched it unfold like a slow-motion catastrophe. Monday night, the pediatric nurses from the private care agency arrived in crisp scrubs with their credentials and their protocols. They took vitals every 2 hours, tracked feeding schedules, adjusted room temperature, monitored sound levels. Elio cried for 6 consecutive hours. Marin joined him after a brief respite. The nurses whispered to each other in the hallway, their professional composure cracking. Tuesday, Dr. Chen returned with a colleague, a pediatric neurologist who ran tests for seizures, reflux, neurological abnormalities. Nothing. They suggested a different formula. It made no difference. One nurse quietly wept in the kitchen at 3 a.m., overwhelmed by the sound of suffering she could not stop. Wednesday, a third doctor arrived, a sleep specialist from Rush University Medical Center. She observed the twins for 4 hours and suggested a mild sedative. Harlon exploded. "You want to drug my 4-day-old daughters because you cannot figure out what is wrong. Get out. Get out of my house." The specialist left. The crying continued. Through it all, Naomi moved quietly through the chaos. She brought fresh linens. She made coffee no one drank. She cleaned bottles and folded blankets and stayed long past her scheduled hours because no one told her to leave, and she could not bring herself to abandon those babies. On Tuesday night, when the second shift nurse stepped out for air, Naomi slipped into the nursery. She stood beside the bassinet where Marin screamed herself hoarse, her tiny face red and contorted. Without thinking, Naomi placed one hand gently on the baby's back. She began to pray, not out loud, just in her spirit, the words Esther May taught her, the words that ask for peace, not outcomes, for comfort, not control. Then she sang, barely a whisper, an old hymn her grandmother used to hum while rocking sick children. "His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me." Marin's cries softened, just for a moment, just enough for Naomi to feel hope flicker. Then the baby started again, and Naomi stepped back as the nurse returned. But something had shifted. By Wednesday, the household staff began to notice. Margaret, the head housekeeper, whispered to the cook that the twins seemed calmer when Naomi was near. One of the nurses mentioned it to Dr. Chen, who dismissed it as coincidence. The night nurse, however, noticed something else. Every time that Maid walks in, the babies stop crying for a few seconds. It is like they recognize something. Thursday morning, the staff gathered in exhausted clusters. Some of them looked at Naomi with suspicion. "She is just a maid," one said. "What could she possibly do that trained professionals cannot?" But others saw the way Elio's tiny fist had gripped Naomi's finger the night before when she adjusted his blanket. The way Marin's eyes tracked Naomi across the room. Harlon saw none of it. He was too consumed by his own failure, his own grief, his own unbearable helplessness. Thursday night, the final night, everyone had reached their breaking point. Dr. Chen went home. The nurses completed their shift and left. The household staff retreated to their quarters. Harlon locked himself in his study, with a bottle of scotch he did not drink, staring at a photo of his late wife. Only Naomi remained. She climbed the stairs to the nursery, where Elio and Marin lay in their bassinets, crying with what little strength they had left. 4 days of anguish had stolen the power from their voices. Now they sounded broken, defeated. Naomi pulled a chair close. She reached into one bassinet, then the other, and carefully, gently, lifted both twins. She carried them to the daybed near the window and sat down, cradling them against her chest. Then she prayed one more time, not for sleep, not for silence, just for peace. "God, I do not know what is hurting these babies, but you do. I am asking you to cover them, to comfort them, to give them rest, not because I deserve to be heard, but because they are yours." She began to hum, then to sing, soft as breath. "Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side." The crying did not stop immediately, but slowly, degree by degree, the twins' bodies relaxed against her. Their breathing steadied, their tiny fists unclenched. Naomi kept singing, kept praying, kept holding them as dawn began to break through the window. And then, for the first time in 4 days, Elio closed his eyes. Marin followed 30 seconds later. Silence crept into the room like something holy. Naomi, exhausted beyond measure, leaned her head back against the cushion and closed her own eyes. She did not hear Harlon Whitmore's car pull into the driveway an hour later. She did not hear his footsteps on the stairs. She did not see him standing in the doorway, frozen, staring at the impossible scene before him, his twins, finally asleep. In the arms of the woman no one thought to ask for help. Harlon Whitmore had not planned to come home. He was supposed to be in New York for another 8 hours, closing a $400 million acquisition that his CFO insisted could not wait. But somewhere over Pennsylvania, at 37,000 feet, staring at spreadsheets he could not focus on, Harlon made a decision that defied every principle of the empire he had built. He told the pilot to turn around. His assistant protested. His lawyer called it financial suicide. Harlon did not care. His daughters were crying themselves to death, and he was negotiating stock options in a leather seat while sipping coffee someone else had poured. What kind of man does that make me? By the time his town car pulled through the iron gates of the estate at 7:23 a.m., Harlon was wound so tight he could barely breathe. 4 days away. 4 days of failure transmitted through frantic phone calls and voicemails from doctors who had run out of ideas. 4 days of imagining his children suffering while he played billionaire in boardrooms far away. He expected chaos when he walked through the front door. He expected crying. He got silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin prickle. The kind that feels wrong in a house that has been screaming for 96 hours straight. Harlon dropped his briefcase in the foyer. His heart hammered against his ribs as he took the stairs 2 at a time, his dress shoes barely making a sound on the runner. Every instinct screamed that something terrible had happened, that the silence meant death, not peace. Please God, he thought, though he had not prayed since Catherine's funeral. Please do not let me be too late. He reached the second-floor hallway. The nursery door stood halfway open, soft morning light spilling through the gap. Harlan's hand trembled as he pushed it wider, and then he froze. Naomi Brooks sat on the daybed near the window, her head tilted back against the cushion, fast asleep. Her maid's uniform was wrinkled beyond recognition. Her hair had come loose from its usual neat bun, and her arms cradled both twins against her chest. Elio and Marin, sleeping peacefully, their tiny faces relaxed, their breathing steady and deep, their little bodies curled into Naomi's warmth like they had finally found what they had been searching for. No machines humming, no monitors beeping, no nurses hovering with clipboards, just a woman and two babies bathed in golden light, surrounded by a silence so profound it felt holy. Harlan's phone slipped from his hand and hit the carpet with a muffled thud. He stood in the doorway, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to process what he was seeing. This was impossible. 4 days of the best medical minds in Chicago had failed. Specialists with decades of experience had left his home defeated. He had spent enough money to buy 3 luxury cars and gotten nothing but more crying, more fear, more helplessness. And here was his maid, his housekeeper, the woman he barely noticed when she cleaned his floors and washed his dishes. She had done what none of them could. Something inside Harlan's chest cracked open, a dam that had held for 4 months, maybe longer, maybe since the moment they told him Catherine was gone and there was nothing they could do to save her. Maybe since he was a boy and learned that showing emotion was weakness, and weakness was death in the world he was born into. Tears came, hot and unstoppable, decades of them, pouring down his face as he gripped the doorframe to keep from collapsing. He wept silently, his shoulders shaking, his throat burning, watching his daughters sleep for the first time since they came home, watching them rest in the arms of a woman who had no medical degree, no credentials, no reason to care beyond simple human decency. "God," he whispered. "Oh, God." Naomi's eyes fluttered open. For a heartbeat, she simply blinked at the ceiling, disoriented. Then she registered the weight in her arms, looked down at the sleeping twins, and memory flooded back. Her head snapped toward the doorway where Harlan stood, tears still streaming down his face. Terror crossed her features. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to. I know I should not have. They were crying and everyone left and I thought, I am so sorry. Please do not." Her voice caught. She thought he was angry. She thought she was about to be fired for overstepping, for touching his children without permission, for daring to do what professionals could not. Harlan shook his head, unable to speak. He stepped into the room, moving slowly like a man approaching something fragile and sacred. He sank into the chair beside the daybed, his eyes fixed on his sleeping daughters. "What did you do?" His voice came out broken, raw. "How did you make them stop?" Naomi looked down at the twins, her own eyes filling with tears. "I prayed over them, sir. I sang to them. I just held them and asked God to give them peace." The words hung in the air between them. Harlan stared at her, this woman he had never really seen before. "I spent $180,000 in 4 days. I brought in specialists from 3 states. I called in favors from people who do not grant favors. And you are telling me that prayer did what none of that could? It was not the prayer alone, Mr. Whitmore." Naomi's voice was gentle, careful. It was presence. Your babies are not sick in their bodies. They are restless in their spirits. Sometimes children cry because they feel something missing, something broken in the world around them. They do not have words for it yet, but they feel it. She adjusted her hold on the twins, careful not to wake them. They lost their mother before they ever knew her. This house has been full of strangers and machines and people who do not know how to just be with them. They needed someone to hold them without trying to fix them. to comfort them without expecting results. Harlan's throat tightened. Are you saying I failed them? I am saying grief is loud, even when we do not speak it, and babies hear everything. The words hit him like a physical blow. He had not grieved Catherine. Not really. He had buried her, signed papers, made arrangements, taken calls from lawyers and accountants and board members. He had done everything except actually feel the loss of his wife, the mother of his children, the woman who was supposed to help him raise them. He had been too busy trying to control the uncontrollable. I have not prayed since my wife's funeral, Harlon admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I have not believed in God since he took her from me. What kind of God lets a good woman die giving life? What kind of God makes innocent babies suffer? Naomi met his eyes, and something in her gaze was ancient and unshakable. I do not know why God allows suffering, Mr. Whitmore. I lost my husband and my son 7 years ago. I ask God the same questions. I am still asking them sometimes. She paused, looking down at the sleeping twins. But I know this. God does not always prevent pain. Sometimes he just sends someone to sit with you in it. Sometimes he uses the most unlikely hands to bring comfort, the overlooked ones, the broken ones, the ones who know what it means to need grace they did not earn. Harlon felt something shift inside him. Something fundamental, a worldview he had built his entire life on crumbling like sand. Why? He asked. Why would you do this for my children? You do not owe us anything. You are just here to clean. Naomi smiled sadly. Because someone held me when I was broken. And because these babies deserve to know they are not alone in the world, even when it feels like they are. Harlon Whitmore, billionaire, empire builder, man who had never bowed to anyone, slowly slid from the chair onto his knees beside the daybed. He reached out with a trembling hand and touched his daughter Marin's tiny fist, then Elio's soft hair. Then he bowed his head and wept like a child. And for the first time in years, he prayed, not for control, not for answers, just for grace. The Whitmore mansion changed after that morning, not in ways you could photograph or measure. The marble floors still gleamed. The chandeliers still cast their expensive light across rooms designed to impress. But something fundamental had shifted in the air itself, like the whole house had exhaled a breath it had been holding for months. Naomi Brooks was no longer just the maid. She did not ask for the change. Harlon simply made it happen. By noon that Thursday, he'd called a household meeting and informed the staff that Naomi would be assisting with the twins' care alongside the nurses. Her schedule was adjusted. Her quarters were moved to the second floor, closer to the nursery. Her salary was tripled without discussion. Margaret, the head housekeeper, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The nurses exchanged glances. One of them quit the following day, offended that her credentials meant less than what she called folk remedies and superstition. Harlon did not try to stop her. He had spent his entire adult life trusting experts, data, and empirical evidence. And when it mattered most, when his daughters needed something money could not purchase, all of it had failed him. A woman with no degree but a prayer on her lips had succeeded where science could not. That was a reality he could no longer ignore. The twins slept through their first full night on Friday, then Saturday. By Sunday, they had settled into a rhythm that seemed almost miraculous to everyone who had witnessed the 4 days of torment. They still cried, of course. All babies cry. But it was different now, normal. The kind of crying that meant hunger or a wet diaper, not the soul-deep anguish that had nearly destroyed them all. And whenever they grew restless, whenever something invisible seemed to trouble them, Naomi was there, humming, praying, holding them with the kind of presence that transcended technique. Harlon, began spending more time at home. He cleared his schedule for 2 weeks, delegating meetings to his CFO and ignoring the protests from his board. For the first time since Catherine died, he sat in the nursery and simply watched his children. He learned the difference between Elio's hungry cry and his tired cry. He discovered that Marin liked being held facing outward so she could see the room. He asked Naomi questions. At first, they were practical. What does that sound mean? How do you know when to pick them up versus letting them self-soothe? But gradually, the questions became deeper. One evening, as Naomi rocked Elio to sleep, Harlon asked, "How did you keep believing in God after losing your son?" Naomi was quiet for a long moment, her hand gentle on the baby's back. "I did not," she finally said. "Not for 2 years. I was angry. I felt abandoned. I thought if God was real and good, he would not have let that happen. What changed?" She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the soft lamplight. "I realized I was asking God to prove himself by giving me what I wanted. But faith is not about getting what you want. It is about trusting that even in the worst pain, you are not alone. That suffering has a purpose you might not see until much later." Harlon absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. "I used to pray as a child. My mother took me to church every Sunday. But then I built my company, and faith seemed irrelevant. I could solve problems with strategy and capital. Prayer felt like wishful thinking." "And now?" Naomi asked gently. "Now, I am not so sure." Harlan's voice was barely above a whisper. "Now I think maybe I have been trying to control things that were never meant to be controlled. Maybe that is why I feel so empty even when I win." Naomi smiled sadly. Catherine used to say something similar. Harlan's head snapped up. "You talked with my wife?" "Sometimes. When she was still well enough to walk the gardens. She told me she worried you had forgotten how to be still, that you were so busy building that you forgot what you were building for." The words landed like stones in water, rippling through him. Catherine had tried to tell him. In 100 small ways, she had tried. But he had been too busy to listen, too convinced that his way was the only way. 3 weeks after that morning, the media ran a story about the Whitmore twins' miraculous recovery. The article credited the team of specialists, the cutting-edge monitoring equipment, the personalized care plan developed by leading pediatric experts. Harlon read it from his study and said nothing. He could have corrected the record. He could have told them the truth, that a maid with a prayer and a grandmother's wisdom had done what $180,000 in medical care could not. But he chose privacy instead. Some things were too sacred for public consumption. What he did do was quietly establish the Catherine Whitmore Foundation for Children's Spiritual Wellness, $20 million in seed funding, a mission to integrate faith-based care into pediatric settings, to train medical professionals to recognize when children needed spiritual comfort alongside physical treatment. He asked Naomi to sit on the board. She said yes. 6 months later, on a Tuesday evening in early autumn, Harlon stood in the doorway of the nursery watching Naomi rock both twins in the oversized chair by the window. The sun was setting, painting the room in shades of amber and rose. Elio and Marin were nearly 7 months old now, healthy and happy, babbling their first sounds and reaching for everything within grasp. Naomi sang softly, an old hymn Harlon half remembered from his childhood. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Harlon felt his throat tighten, not with grief this time, with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, not just to Naomi, though she deserved his thanks, but to something larger, someone larger. The presence he had, denied for decades but could no longer ignore. Thank you for sending her. Thank you for teaching me what really matters. Thank you for giving me another chance. Naomi looked up and caught his eye. She smiled, that gentle, knowing smile that had comforted his children when nothing else could. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Harlon smiled back, and in that moment, standing in a nursery where his daughters slept peacefully, where his late wife's memory lived in every carefully chosen detail, where a woman everyone had overlooked had performed a miracle with nothing but faith and love, Harlon Whitmore finally understood. True healing does not come from money or power or control. It comes from connection, from humility, from being willing to receive grace through the most unexpected hands. God does not always work through the people you expect. Sometimes He works through the ones you never thought to see. The quiet ones, the broken ones, the ones who know what it means to need saving because they have been saved themselves. What the best doctors in Chicago could not fix, what $180,000 could not purchase, what all of Harlan's wealth and influence could not command, a maid with a prayer and a grandmother's faith had restored. Not just sleep, but peace, not just for the twins, but for them all. In the Whitmore mansion, where silence had once been a luxury purchased with money and maintained with power, it became something different, something holy. A reminder that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought. They can only be given and received with open hands.